I woke up to the sound of my land screaming. It wasn't a metaphor. It was the brutal reality of what was happening right outside my window. The deep rumbling of engines, the violent crunch of stalks being trampled under massive tires, the distant whoops and laughter of people who clearly had no regard for hard work. Every noise drilled into my skull as I bolted upright. My heart pounded as I threw on my boots, shoved open the door, and ran outside, my brain refusing to accept what my eyes were seeing. A horde of ATVs, at least a dozen of them, tore through my wheat field like a pack of wild animals set loose in a glass shop. Dust and golden stalks flew into the air as engines roared and tires spun deep ruts into the soil I had spent months preparing. The devastation was immediate. Rows of wheat flattened under thick rubber, stalks ripped out by their roots, the once pristine field now a chaotic mess of destruction. And there, at the front of the reckless gang, was none other than Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, her blonde bob flapping wildly under her helmet as she steered her ATV in wild circles, grinning like she had just won the lottery. I felt my hands clench into fists, my jaw locking so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Karen. Of course it was Karen. The woman had made it her personal mission to be a thorn in my side since the day I moved out here, constantly pushing ridiculous HOA rules onto me despite the fact that my land wasn't even part of her jurisdiction. And now she had taken things to a whole new level. With a deep breath, I stomped forward, waving my arms like a lunatic, trying to get their attention. Hey! Hey! What the hell do you think you're doing? The response? More laughter. More engines revving. More wheat being shredded under the relentless assault of their off-road rampage. My stomach twisted as Karen locked eyes with me, smirking as she pulled her ATV right up to where I stood. She yanked off her helmet, flipping her hair like she was in some sort of shampoo commercial, and let out a fake sigh. "Oh, relax, farm boy," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's just a field." My vision blurred with rage. Just a field. Just a field. The months of back-breaking labor, the countless hours of watering, the meticulous planning, reduced to just a field. I took a deep breath, forcing myself not to let my temper explode just yet. "This isn't some community park, Karen," I snapped. "This is my land. My crops. And you and your little minions are destroying it." Bob, Karen's equally insufferable husband, pulled up next to her, his gut straining against his too-tight polo shirt. He snorted, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Jake. Wheat is just fancy grass. It'll grow back." Behind him, the rest of the HOA gang laughed like they had just heard the best joke of the century. My fingers twitched at my sides, itching to grab something, anything, to make them understand the damage they were causing. "You're trespassing," I gritted out, my voice low and sharp. "Get off my land. Now." Karen let out an exaggerated gasp, placing a hand over her chest as if I had deeply offended her. "Trespassing? Oh, sweetheart, I don't think you understand how things work around here." She motioned toward the other riders, her expression turning smug. "This land is part of the HOA's jurisdiction. We approved this as a recreational area." I stared at her, stunned into silence for a solid 3 seconds before I let out a disbelieving laugh. "Are you out of your mind? This isn't HOA property. This is my private farm." She rolled her eyes. "Tomato, tomato. HOA rules still apply. And according to our latest community newsletter, this field is now designated as an outdoor activity zone." My eye twitched. "A community newsletter does not rewrite property laws, Karen." She tilted her head, clearly enjoying herself. "Well, that's up for debate." I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my breath coming in short, furious bursts. It wasn't just the sheer audacity of what she was saying, it was the way she was saying it. The absolute, unwavering confidence in her voice, like she truly believed she had the power to override reality itself. And still, the ATVs continued their reign of terror. Another deep rumble of engines, another cloud of dirt and golden stalks flying into the air. My patience snapped like a brittle twig. Without another word, I pulled my phone from my pocket and started recording. "What are you doing?" Karen asked, narrowing her eyes. I didn't look up as I dialed. "Calling the police." The laughter that followed was loud, obnoxious, and filled with condescension. Bob wiped a fake tear from his eye. "Oh man, that's rich. Go ahead, call them. Let's see how that works out for you." I said nothing, my jaw tight as I turned my back on them, pressing the phone to my ear. "Yes, officer? I need immediate assistance. I have multiple trespassers on my property actively destroying my crops." Karen let out a snort, but I could hear the faintest hint of uncertainty creeping into her voice. "Oh, come on, Jake. You're really going to waste police time on this?" I turned to face her, my phone still at my ear. "You seem awfully confident for someone who's about to have a criminal trespassing charge on her record." Her smirk faltered just a little. A voice crackled on the other end of the line. "We're dispatching officers now. Stay put." I clicked off the call and tucked my phone away, turning my full attention back to Karen and her HOA circus. The moment stretched, a long and heavy pause settling between us as I crossed my arms. Karen was the first to break. She threw her leg over her ATV and straightened her shoulders, lifting her chin. "Fine. We'll leave." Bob's face twisted in disbelief. "What?" "Karen," I said. "We're leaving," she snapped, shooting him a warning glare. "I'm not in the mood to deal with some overzealous officer who doesn't understand community rights." Bob grumbled under his breath, but he started his engine. The rest of the HOA followed suit, albeit with much less enthusiasm. One by one, they revved their engines and took off, tearing through what was left of my wheat field like a final insult before they vanished down the road. I exhaled slowly, trying to will my heart rate back to normal. The field was a mess. My crops, my hard work, trampled, shredded, crushed under careless tires. My fingers curled into fists as I stared at the destruction. Then, in the distance, the distinct sound of sirens cut through the air. I turned toward the road, watching as the first patrol car appeared, its lights flashing as it sped toward my driveway. A slow, satisfied smile crept onto my face. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The flashing red and blue lights bounced off the dirt road as the patrol car came to a slow halt in front of my property. I stood there, arms crossed, heart still hammering with the rage of what had just unfolded. My wheat field, my months of work, reduced to nothing but trampled stalks and deep tire rut. The sight alone was enough to make my blood boil, but the fact that Karen and her little HOA army had done it with smug grins on their faces made it worse. The driver's door of the police cruiser swung open, and out stepped Officer Harris, a stocky man with a tired expression that suggested he'd seen enough of this town's ridiculous disputes to last a lifetime. His partner, a younger officer named Reed, followed suit, surveying the damage with a low whistle. "Looks like a war zone," Reed muttered, kicking at a broken stalk of wheat. I nodded, jaw tight. "That's exactly what it is." Harris adjusted his belt and turned his gaze to me. "All right, Jake, walk me through what happened." I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay even as I recounted the event. From the moment the ATVs roared onto my land to the moment I called the police, I laid it all out. Every detail, every smirk, every dismissive remark from Karen and Bob. The officers listened in silence, their expressions growing graver by the second. When I was done, Harris let out a sigh, running a hand down his face. "And you're saying they claimed this was HOA approved?" I nodded. Karen said she had paperwork that proved my land was under HOA jurisdiction. Reed let out a short laugh. "That's not how property laws work." "Exactly," I said, my teeth clenched. She acted like she could just declare my farm part of the HOA by writing it in some community newsletter. Harris turned back toward his patrol car. "All right, let's see what she has to say for herself." He grabbed his radio and spoke into it. "Dispatch, I need a unit sent to the residence of Karen Dalton. Possible trespassing and destruction of property charges." The radio crackled in response, confirming that another officer was en route. Meanwhile, Reed glanced toward the road, where the ATV tracks led straight back to the neighborhood. "You got any security cameras out here?" That was the only silver lining in this whole disaster. I pulled out my phone and opened the camera feed. I installed cameras after the last time the HOA gave me trouble. They caught everything. Reed leaned over to look as I played back the footage. The video showed the ATVs ripping through my field, Karen's smug face in full view as she spun donuts in the crop. Bob and the rest of the HOA gang hooped and cheered, treating my land like their own personal playground. And then came the damning part, Karen, standing there, boldly declaring that the HOA had approved the destruction. Harris let out a low whistle. "That's some pretty strong evidence." "Strong enough to press charges?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. Harris exchanged a look with Reed before nodding. "Definitely." The moment was interrupted by the distant sound of another car approaching. A second police cruiser pulled up, and stepping out of it was none other than Officer Daniels, a stern-looking woman who took no nonsense from anyone, least of all entitled HOA members. She wasted no time, marching straight over. "Where's Karen?" she asked. Harris jerked his thumb toward the neighborhood. "At her house, I assume. You want to go have a chat?" Daniels nodded. "Absolutely." She turned to me. "Jake, you pressing charges?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes." Daniels gave me a firm nod and headed back to her car, driving off toward the neighborhood with purpose. Harris and Reed stayed behind, taking a few more photos of the damage before finally patting me on the shoulder. "We'll keep you updated," Harris said. "For now, just hang tight." I watched as their car disappeared down the road, leaving me standing in the middle of my ruined field. The rage still bubbled inside me, but there was a deep satisfaction in knowing Karen wasn't going to get away with this. Not this time. Less than an hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Harris. "Karen's been detained for questioning. She tried to use fake HOA documents as a defense. It didn't go well for her." I let out a laugh, shaking my head. That woman had the audacity of a medieval queen. Thinking she could override actual property laws with some cheap printout from her home office was next-level delusion. The sun was setting when another text came through, this time from one of my neighbors, Sam. "Dude, Karen just got escorted out of her house by the cop. HOA is losing its mind." I grinned, picturing the chaos. The next morning, I drove into town for supplies, stopping by the local diner for coffee. The place was buzzing with talk, and it wasn't long before I overheard my own name in the conversations. "Did you hear about Jake's farm? I heard Karen thought she could just take his land. She's finally getting what's coming to her." I smirked as I grabbed my coffee, but my satisfaction was short-lived. Because the moment I walked outside, I saw Bob standing by my truck, arms crossed and a sour look on his face. "You think this is funny?" he growled. I sipped my coffee, unbothered. "Yeah, actually. I do." Bob stepped closer, trying to loom over me, but it was hard to be intimidating when you were wearing boat shoes and a golf shirt. "You just made a big mistake, Jake." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? And what mistake is that?" Bob leaned in. "You think Karen's the only one with power in this town? We're going to make your life hell." I laughed, shaking my head. "Bob, you already tried that. Look where it got you." His face turned red with anger, but before he could say anything else, the sound of a siren hooped nearby. A patrol car rolled through the parking lot, and Bob took a step back, muttering something under his breath before storming off. I watched him go, finishing my coffee with a sigh. This wasn't over. Not yet. As I drove back home, I kept my eyes on the road, my mind running through the next step. The HOA had already crossed the line once. I had no doubt they'd try again. But this time I was ready. The next morning, I stepped out onto my porch with a cup of coffee, taking in the view of my battered wheat field. The sight still made my stomach churn, but it wasn't just the damage that had me on edge. It was the lingering feeling that Karen and her HOA minions weren't done yet. The way Bob had threatened me in the parking lot stuck in my mind like a splinter, and if I had learned anything about these people, it was that they didn't know how to take a loss gracefully. The sound of my phone buzzing in my pocket pulled me out of my thoughts. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from Officer Harris. Karen's facing multiple fines. Trespassing, destruction of property, attempted fraud. She's not happy. I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. Not happy was an understatement. Karen probably had steam coming out of her ears by now. She was used to throwing her weight around and getting her way, and now, for the first time, the law had put a wall between her and whatever ridiculous scheme she had planned next. I had barely finished reading the message when a loud hissing noise reached my ears. I turned toward the side of my house, my stomach twisting with suspicion. That wasn't a normal sound. It was too sharp, too deliberate. Setting my coffee down, I walked around the corner of the house, my eyes scanning the ground, and then I saw it. My irrigation pipes slashed. Water gushed out in messy arcs, spraying the dirt, my plants, and everything in between. My fists clenched as I crouched down, running my fingers over the deep cuts in the tubing. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't wear and tear. Someone had taken a knife to my system. I straightened up, scanning the area. Nothing. No movement, no sign of anyone nearby. But I knew who was behind it. Karen might have been under police watch, but Bob? He had been fuming yesterday. He was desperate, and desperate people did stupid things. I pulled my phone out again and dialed Harris. The moment he answered, I didn't bother with a greeting. They sabotaged my irrigation. Harris let out a frustrated sigh. You got proof? I have cameras, I said, already heading toward my barn where I kept the security system monitors. I'll check the footage. Send me anything you find, Harris said. If it's them, they just made things a lot worse for themselves. I ended the call and went straight to the security feed. My eyes flicked over the various camera angles, my pulse picking up as I fast-forwarded through the footage from the night before. It didn't take long. At exactly 2:43 a.m., the screen showed two figures sneaking onto my property, dressed in dark clothes, moving toward my irrigation setup. I slowed the footage, squinting at the grainy shapes, and then my lips curled into a grim smile. Bob. And another HOA board member, Greg. They weren't exactly master criminals. The idiots didn't even try to hide their faces. Bob took out a knife, slashing at the pipes while Greg stood watch, looking around like a nervous teenager about to get caught breaking curfew. I could see Bob muttering something, his expression smug as he did his work. I didn't waste any time. I clipped the footage and sent it to Harris. Within minutes, my phone rang. We're on our way, Harris said. I walked back outside, standing on my porch as I waited. The sun had barely climbed over the horizon when the first patrol car pulled up. This time, it wasn't just Harris. It was Daniels, too, the officer who had dealt with Karen the day before. She stepped out of her vehicle with a look of pure irritation on her face, like she couldn't believe she had to waste another morning dealing with these people. They really don't know when to quit, do they? She said, looking at me. Apparently not, I muttered. Harris walked over to me, tilting his head toward my field. We're going to go pay Bob a visit. You want to tag along? I hesitated for a second, then nodded. Yeah, I do. 15 minutes later, we were pulling into Bob's driveway. His house was exactly what you'd expect from a man like him. Perfectly manicured lawn, 2 overpriced SUVs in the driveway, and a flagpole with an HOA banner flapping in the wind like he was the mayor of some tiny, self-important kingdom. Harris and Daniels wasted no time knocking on the door. It took a few moments, but eventually, Bob answered, his expression shifting from mild annoyance to full-blown panic when he saw me standing with the officers. Morning, Bob, Harris said casually. We need to have a chat. Bob let out a forced laugh, stepping out onto the porch. Sure, officers. What's this about? Daniels crossed her arms. You want to explain why you and Greg were trespassing on Jake's property last night? or why you decided to take a knife to his irrigation system." Bob's face went pale. He glanced at me, then back at the officers. That's ridiculous. I was home all night." Daniels pulled out her phone, tapped the screen a few times, and then turned it toward Bob. The video of him and Greg played in perfect, incriminating detail. Bob's mouth opened and closed, his face turning an impressive shade of red. Okay, look," he stammered. This is being blown out of proportion. It was just a prank. We didn't actually break anything." Daniels raised an eyebrow. "You cut through irrigation pipes." Bob let out a strangled laugh. "They can be fixed. It's not like we burned his house down or something." Harris shook his head. "That's not how this works, Bob. You're facing charges for trespassing, destruction of property, and vandalism." Bob's confidence crumbled in real time. His shoulders slumped, and for a brief second, he actually looked like he might cry. "Come on, man," he said, looking at Harris. "There's gotta be a way to work this out." "There is," Harris said. "You come with us." Bob let out a string of curses under his breath as Harris and Daniels cuffed him. As they led him to the patrol car, Greg appeared in the doorway, his face drained of all color. He didn't even try to argue. He just held out his hands, waiting for his cuffs like a man who had already accepted his fate. I watched as they were loaded into the back of the car, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. The HOA had lost. Completely. 2 days later, Karen was officially forced to step down as HOA president. Bob and Greg both pleaded guilty to their charges, paying hefty fines that no doubt made their wallets cry. The HOA board was restructured, new leadership put in place, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood wasn't under the iron fist of Karen and her delusional rule. The best part? With the settlement money I received, I was able to repair my field, upgrade my irrigation system, and even install a little surprise. Right in the middle of my land, standing tall among the golden wheat, was a brand new scarecrow. And on its chest, in big, bold letters, I had stitched one single word: Karen. The first time Karen drove by and saw it, she nearly swerved off the road in rage. I just smiled, tipping my hat as she sped away. It was a good day.